A very warm welcome to all of you. I am Milind Thakare from S.V.K.T College, Devuladi Camp, Nasik. Today, we are going to understand the poem, understand and analyze the poem, The Felling of the Banyan Tree by S.V.K.T. As all of you know that S.V.K.T is a bilinguist poet. He has written poems in Marathi and English as well. He has also written the famous book Tuka Says in English. This poem is the S.V.K.T himself regarded this poem as autobiographical and historical. According to him, the poem described his engagement with persons and places. It is about the progression of the time, death and loss, and it also talks about the memory and perhaps a hope of liberation of which he clinged. The Felling of the Banyan Tree was first published in the book Traveling in a Cage in 1980. And this poem is studied in most of the colleges, Indian colleges and schools. The Felling of the Tree, it focuses on a particular time in a family's history when a father of the poet made a drastic decision to leave the place. This poem is in 25 lines. There are 3 stanzas. It is also a type of eco-criticism. The poem, which is of 25 lines, is as following. My father told the tenants to leave, who lived on the houses surrounding our house on the hill. One by one, the structures were demolished. Only our own house remained and the trees. Trees are sacred, my grandmother used to say. Felling them is a crime, but he massacred them all. The sheuga, the audumber, the neem were all cut down. But the huge banyan tree stood like a problem whose roots lay deeper than all our lives. My father ordered it to be removed. The banyan tree was 3 times as tall as our house. Its trunk had a circumference of 50 feet. Its scraggy aerial roots fell to the ground. From 30 feet or more, so first they cut the branches, sawing them off for 7 days, and the heap was huge. Insects and birds began to leave the tree, and then they came to its massive trunk. 50 men with axes chopped and chopped. The great tree revealed its rings of 200 years. We watched in terror and fascination this slaughter. As a raw mythology revealed to us its age, soon afterwards we left Baroda for Bombay, where there are no trees except the one which grows and seeds in one's dreams, its aerial roots looking for a ground to strike. So this is the poem. When we read this poem at the beginning, we can say that the speaker, the narrator, his house is situated on the hill. The first line says that my father told the tenants to leave, who lived on the houses surrounding our house on the hill. Means the speaker's father, the narrator's father, told the tenants to leave the houses, to vacate the house, their houses. And it was surrounded on the hill by the nature. And one by one, the structures were demolished. Now, the houses were demolished. The narrator's father told the tenants that they will have to leave the place as they are going to leave the place, and one by one the houses, the structures were demolished. The process of destruction was, you may say, the natural phenomenon. People were living there, the tenants were living there for years, and after all the houses were demolished, there was only the narrator's own house, and there were trees. Trees are sacred, my grandmother used to say. See, in the first line, the father is telling that they are going to destruct all the houses, they are going to demolish all the houses, they are going to sell the place, they are going to cut the trees. And on the other hand, the narrator's grandmother used to say that trees are sacred. And this is a very remarkable statement. The grandmother was a religious minded, and she always invoked love. And she used to say that trees are sacred and cutting them is a crime. We should not cut the trees. It's against the nature, and it is a crime to cut the tree. But the father, he massacred them all. But the father of the narrator, he did not pay attention to his mother. He neglected it, and he cut all the trees. What were the trees? The trees were the shevga, the audumbar, the neem, all were cut down. Now, after cutting all the trees, there was only one huge banyan tree. And it was like a big problem. And everyone knows how the banyan tree is. It's very huge, and its roots are laid deeper than all our lives. The roots means the banyan tree was very old. And you may have noticed that the grandmother represents the feminine world, and the father is very practical. He wants to leave the city. They were living in Baroda. And they wanted to shift to Bombay. This or the narrator's grandmother is so pure that she thinks that she cannot live without the trees, she cannot live without the nature. And so she is saying that it is a crime to cut the tree. For her, trees were sacred. Because she always used to refer trees as sacred. And she worships nature. And on the other hand, the father of the narrator, he presents the world which exploits the nature and wants to rule over the world. His father, the narrator's father, ordered to cut the trees. And he chopped all the trees. And he had sold. It may be for the monetary, he would have got some monetary gain. But we can see that he was very heartless. And he does not listen to the advice. What his mother used to tell, that cutting trees is a crime, trees are sacred. But he massacred them all. See, the word massacre is used. Means he destroyed all the trees. He chopped all the trees. So we can say that his father was a heartless person. And on the other hand, his grandmother worshipped nature. And the narrator's father has almost demolished the nature. Then there was a big problem of a huge banyan tree, which was more than 200 years old. And his father ordered it to be removed. Means his father also told to chop the banyan tree. The same tree which was 3 times as tall as the house of the narrator. It was larger. It was bigger than their house. And the tree was 3 times taller than the narrator's house, and its trunk had a radius of 50 feet. And its scraggy aerial roots fell to the ground. The roots which were hanging, they reached the ground. From 30 feet or more, so first they cut the branches. The roots were touching the ground, and the father of the narrator, he ordered to cut the tree. And they started cutting the tree, beginning with the branches. The branches fell down, sawing them off for 7 days, and the heap was huge. It took 7 days to cut the tree. and there was a large heap which was very huge. And the tree, which was almost 30 feet tall, which had the radius, which its trunk had a circumference of 50 feet, was almost to the ground. It fell to the ground. And sawing them off for 7 days, and the heap was huge, insects and birds began to leave the tree. See, and then they came to its massive trunk. Insects and birds who were living, who had been staying there, living there, having their nests there, they had to leave the tree. This shows the cutting of an innocent world, insects and birds. It was a home for them. Many types of insects and birds were living there, and they would have got their, they must have been the food chain for their livelihood. They were living on the tree. The tree fed them. Now, as the tree was cut to the ground, their shelter, food, all was gone. All was eradicated. And so they had to leave the place. They had to leave the tree. And then they came to its massive trunk. They means the people who were brought to cut the tree. They started to cut the massive trunk. 50 men with axes chopped and chopped. And around 50 men were called to cut the tree. And they had chopped the tree. Now this, they were chopping it continuously. And we watched in terror and fascination this slaughter. The narrator was a child. The great tree, it revealed its rings of 200 years. It was 200 years old. And the narrator and his cousins, brothers, they were watching it. They were watching it in terror. They were scared. They were in fear. Because everything was destroyed. Everything was cut down to the earth. And they were also fascinated by the slaughter. And they had mixed feeling both of terror and fascination. As a raw mythology revealed to us its age, soon afterwards we left Baroda for Bombay. And after the cutting of the trees, the demolition of the houses, the cutting of the banyan tree, the family left Baroda for Bombay. And where there are no trees except the one, where there are no trees. In Bombay, there were no trees. Trees were only in the dreams. And as Bombay was a land of technology, where there were no trees, no natural beauty was there. There were all cement buildings, houses were there everywhere. But there was the tree. It was still there in the memory. And it used to come in his dreams. Now this, if you see, the first stanza, it describes the relationship between nature and feminine world and masculine world. The father is the symbol of masculine world, and the grandmother who loves nature is the symbol or represents the feminine world. And in the last stanza, in the second stanza, all the trees were chopped, all the trees were slaughtered. And the third stanza, it talks about the consequences. And what was the result? The result of afforestation on the innocent world. Innocent world means the insects, the birds who had to leave, who had to disappear. And as the narrator, his brothers, friends, they were young, they couldn't do anything. They had to witness with mixed feeling of terror and fascination the cutting of the tree. They were just passive. They couldn't oppose their father. And when they went to Bombay, which was a dense city, metropolitan city, where there was no nature around, there were no trees around. It was a place of technology. So this poem talks about the technology and the exploitation of nature. The father had chosen the technology. He decided to shift to Bombay, and instead of staying at Baroda. Now, the banyan tree is a metaphor for the poet's life. And it was a metaphor for the family's disruption. And the man who was responsible for this was the father. So, the father who represents the masculine world was very practical. He represents all the masculine. He is the dominant figure. He is very forward looking, very practical, and destructive. On the other hand, The grandmother, she represents that what all feminine. She talks about the past. She is a religious person. She is conservative. She believes in nature. She worships nature. So this is the theme, the patriarchal versus matriarchal. The narrator is actually favoring his grandmother, but he is helpless to stop the cutting of the trees. And so this poem, if we see, it explores a special time in the life of the narrator when the family roots were torn out. They had to leave Baroda to live a new life. And the decision was taken by the father. There is no reason given in the poem. There is no specific details as to why the houses were demolished, the trees were cut, and why they had to shift to Bombay. The felling of the tree, we saw that it is a free verse poem of 3 stanzas. There are 25 lines, and one of the important characteristics of this poem is that there is no rhyme scheme, no meter. And it is there are different rhythms of each line. And while doing analysis of the poem, we come to know that the central theme of this poem is uprootedness. The idea of leaving the ancestral home, or the idea of leaving a family home. There is also the secondary theme, which is of ecosystems, how they are destructed, cutting of the trees for the profit, how humans are harming the nature, destructing the nature in the name of the progress. While going through this poem, you must have noticed that this poem is in the style of conversational, as if the narrator is talking to us. He is telling a story of a banyan tree to us, to the reader. You may also say that it is a short story being told by the speaker, by the narrator. The language is very simple. The words itself reveal the idea of masculine versus feminine, the theme of destruction versus conservation. The words demolished, massacred, removed, terror, slaughter, they all represent destruction. They talk about the character of the father. And they also talk about masculine idea. Sacred, deeper, revealed, fascination, all these words represent feminine. So this poem the feeling of the banyan tree. And the banyan tree is a metaphor. It talks about the speaker's family history. So, this is the poem. In the next lecture, we are going to practice grammar and tenses.